breaking news. Oh, snap, news is broken, breaking news.
And that is that Gregg Berhalter, now per multiple reports, but first broken by Fox Sports, Doug McIntyre, their U.S. men's national team insider. Gregg Berhalter is out as the U.S. men's national team coach following the exit by the Americans in the group stage of Copa America. And this is pretty monumental for U.S. soccer. We're entering an incredibly important phase for the sport in this country. And I know that sounds like a big statement, but we saw a pretty significant growth in the U.S. in soccer participation at the youth levels after the 1994 World Cup. And at that point, the World Cup was still not remotely close to what it is today, a billion-dollar enterprise in its own right as a tournament, nevertheless part of the multi-billion-dollar FIFA. I mean, soccer was still relative, obviously, people have been playing soccer in the U.S. for decades and decades and decades. But the expansion of soccer in this country blew up after 1994. Specifically speaking, in the 5-6 years following, I have to look up the exact date, but MLS started. Not like MLS is as old as the English Premier League. There hasn't been a premier soccer league to the extent that MLS is even premier, but the top flight soccer league in this country for very long relative to the NBA, Major League Baseball, et cetera, et cetera. 1994 was the last time the U.S. hosted the Men's World Cup, is enormously significant in terms of the growth trajectory of this country. And 2026 is next. The U.S. is splitting hosting duties with Canada and Mexico. The final will be played here in the U.S. It will be played at MetLife Stadium, just outside of New York City. Of course, home to Jets and the Giants, as so many of you listening know. But this is, I think, the chance for the game to take the next big step, both in if it wants to continue to push in larger youth participation, but also a chance to maybe be the jumping off point for the U.S. to take yet another step as the generation that grows up watching this and going to these games ultimately gets inspired and plays at an even higher level, and the U.S. can go from being a team that's kind of a middle-level team. They're not bad. They routinely make the major tournaments, et cetera, et cetera. They're probably the best team in CONCACAF right now, with Mexico struggling. Obviously, Canada would have something to say about that. They just lost last night to Argentina in Copa America, so they've been the most recent, farthest participant in a major tournament, although the U.S. has beaten Canada multiple times in Nations League and Gold Cup in previous years. So head-to-head, the U.S. has been better. Point is, being the best in CONCACAF, the North American region, is not really something to brag about. And if the U.S. ultimately wants to genuinely compete on the world stage, the kind of boost that you get as a soccer nation from hosting a World Cup is massive. And thus, to go into it with an inferior chance compared to what you think you're capable of would be an incredibly stupid decision. And Canada already made a relatively tough call in firing their coach mid-cycle, and they just 2 months ago, not even, hired Jesse Marsch, who many would consider the most accomplished American coach in the world. He is the only American coach that coached in the Premier League. He was fired from his job at Leeds United, which was a somewhat controversial decision, but not ultimately terribly controversial. They weren't very good. They'd had a bunch of injuries, and they were playing a little bit better at the time he got fired, something that we actually talked about a little bit on the show last summer, in part because we thought, could Marsch all of a sudden become a candidate for the U.S. men's national team job? Because, to get back to the bigger picture here and catch everybody up, if you're like, okay, I hear you, this sounds pretty important. The guy who's going to coach, or was supposed to coach the U.S. men's national team in the World Cup, just got fired. What are we doing? This was the guy who coached them in the last World Cup, where they did exactly what they were supposed to, which was get out of the group stage and then lose to a better team. Okay, so you don't exceed expectations there. Berhalter's played or coached to some smaller tournament wins. Okay, fine. But he's also had some big losses, and they've never competed well against major competition. About the best they've ever done against a truly great team is tying Brazil 0-0 about a month ago in a friendly leading up to Copa America. What was it, 4 or 5 days after they got just absolutely blitzkrieged by Colombia 5-0 at Commander's Field in Landover. So the tally of big losses is high. The tally of signature wins is next to nothing. And if you're looking at it from a performance standpoint, there's not really a lot to write home about. Add in the fact that there was a lot of controversy, including a very old domestic violence incident, including him spilling about his decision to bench one of his best players in the World Cup to a leadership conference that got leaked and caused the old domestic violence story to come out last year, gigantic, or 2 years ago, gigantic story post-World Cup. And so there's this 6-month period where no one's coaching U.S. soccer outside of the interim, B.J. Callahan, who actually is no longer available if he was to be in the candidate pool because he just signed on to be the head coach in MLS at Nashville. But Berhalter was in consideration for the job, but it wasn't his. And we thought, is Jesse Marsch maybe going to be able to come and take this job now because Leeds fired him in the Premier League? There's a couple of other names. No. Berhalter ultimately gets rehired for the job and proceeds to be the exact same mediocre coach that he was. And now, after yet another even worse than mediocre, losing in particularly the group stage of this group that they lost at Copa America, where Panama and Bolivia are far, far worse sides, far, far worse shape as soccer teams than the Americans, and to not make it out of that group is thoroughly embarrassing. And it happens because of some things that have happened similarly. Major players, in this case, Tim Weah. In the past, it's been Serginho Dest, getting red cards in big games. Just there's not a level of discipline to this team. They don't create enough chances. And some of this certainly is on the players and the need for a better American player pool. But that actually is the thing that brings this full circle. While this is the most accomplished in terms of European experience player pool that we've ever had, if we're going to take the next jump as a footballing nation, we need to perform well at this World Cup. We need to figure out how to maximize the current group and inspire the next one. If we rewind to 2011, 2015, 2019, where the U.S. women come in second to Japan in an absolutely classic match in the World Cup in 2011, win in 2015, and then win in 2019, so many of those women talk about the 1999 World Cup that the U.S. won on its own soil. They won here at home, the ultimate game, the championship game, a 1-0 penalty shootout win over a shootout win over China. The famous photo, Brandi Chastain hits the game winner, takes off her jersey, and is on the cover of Sports Illustrated, the whole deal that actually happened 25 years ago today. And if you talk to Kristen Press and Tobin Heath and Alex Morgan and Heather O'Reilly and Crystal Dunn and so many of the different, whether slightly older, slightly younger players that were made up that 2015, 2019, and even back to 2011 group of players, they will tell you some of them were in the stands, whether it's that day at the Rose Bowl in 1999 in Pasadena, or another game. Heather O'Reilly's told the story on our training podcast. As she used to actually train with my co-host on that. But she's told me and Chris, I remember going to a game in New Jersey and tailgating, playing Backstreet Boys in the van with my soccer team along the way. And that was the thing that pushed her interest in the game to another level. And so to have that moment for young American men here in the States, that could be the thing that inspires them to rethink. And maybe they're a great football player, great baseball player, great basketball player, and also a great soccer player. And maybe that's the thing that pushes them to have our very best athletes choosing soccer more often, if that's something that they want to do. Maybe it's something that a coach, gets an idea because he's interested in the game and, he's the future American coach and changes the way that we play as a country, that refines our game, our tactics, the way the youth programs work, all of it, and becomes a great force for American soccer that leads to World Cups in, if it's 2026, 2046, 20 years later. We don't know what the trickle down will be, but we know it's important, and we have the evidence to see that. And to go into something that important with an inferior / not the best you can possibly get coach would have been incredibly, incredibly unprofessional, stupid, lazy, whatever. Is there risk? Of course. But not having the risk of doing it, or the risk of going in with Berhalter, to me, is far less than going in with someone who is not Berhalter, who has a chance to change what the U.S. has done and get better results, because we know what the results will be. Gregg was the coach for 6 years, and ultimately that was enough to see what he is.
Hey, this is DA, and you're listening to The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.
we are continuing to react to the breaking news here on the Team 980 that Gregg Berhalter is out as the U.S. men's national team coach. And I told you if we could get one of our friends on to talk about it, we would. And lo and behold, one of our friends has come through. Sebastian Salazar, host of all pretty much ESPN soccer coverage. Few guys on the planet who know more about more soccer than Sebi joins us now. Sebastian, muchas gracias, senor. Thank you for your time on a very busy day. I'm sure it's a little chaotic for you as you guys plan Football Americas and everything you're doing with Copa America and the coverage and the podcast. And now we got a Gregg Berhalter story on top of it. What do you make of the news and the timing and kind of how long it took, the process they went through that ultimately results with Gregg Berhalter no longer being the coach of the U.S. men's national team?
Yeah, I mean, in totality, it's not that much of a surprise. I think obviously what happened in the Copa America is just a blatant failure. So coming off that, his dismissal can't be that much of a surprise. And then last week, there were reports that U.S. Soccer was going to make an announcement midweek this week. And it's like you would probably not tell people there's an announcement coming just to say we're keeping the status quo, right? If they really wanted to stay with Gregg Berhalter, they would have told us that right from the jump. And so I think there was a little bit of a strategy from the federation to maybe try and buy themselves as much time as possible and see if kind of the rancor and the intensity from the fan base towards Berhalter specifically would die down. I don't think that happened in a way that they could really move forward. If you look at like some of the federation's social media accounts on July 4th, when they sent out their like happy July 4th tweet, they had to shut off the comments. The CEO of the federation can't tweet about Major League Soccer or the National Women's Soccer League without like literally every response being fire Gregg Berhalter. So I think what they found was just there was an untenable amount of kind of negative energy towards this coach based on the totality of his body of work, but also very specifically this failure in the Copa America. And despite the fact that the leadership of the federation did not want to part ways with Gregg Berhalter, they really believed he was their guy. They backed him through really, really like major scandals. But I think the fans won out here. The fans and the media kind of hit an intensity in their message that has never been hit in this country before. And I think it's in a lot of ways a testament to the growth of the sport.
So let me ask you this. Who's right? Because I know where I've sat, which is that I don't think he should have been rehired. If I'm remembering correctly, you were also in the same boat, and I've certainly seen some of your commentary in the post-Copa America where you're like, yeah, it's time to go. Like, what's the disconnect here between what U.S. Soccer and some of the officials there see and the mediocre results that we are, or worse, in the Copa America case, results that the rest of us are reacting to?
Well, I think it's kind of just down to ambition. I think, we call fans because it's short for fanatics. And so, as fans, we, in many cases, both see the potential worst case scenario, but also the best case scenario. And right now, if you're an American soccer fan, you're looking at, like, beyond doubt, no question, the most talented generation of American players ever. You're looking at a home World Cup in 2 years. And so the hope, the expectations, maybe even a little bit loftier than they should be, but it's to reach a quarterfinal or to reach a semifinal. I think for U.S. Soccer, the ambitions are different. I think it's much more of a business organization than a sporting organization. And so they looked at kind of what they wanted to budget for the men's national team coach, which is not much. They paid Gregg Berhalter around $2.2 million. Which, is not money for you or I to sneeze at, but is also, relative to national team manager salaries worldwide, it's not that impressive. Like countries like Paraguay are outspending us when it comes to the men's national team manager. Gregg Berhalter, I think, was 9th highest paid in this tournament, the Copa America. So I think fans, because of the player pool and because of this World Cup coming up, think the team should be playing better, and that if this manager's not showing us signs that he's taken him in the right direction after he already had a cycle with this team, let's give him some credit for what he did, building this program out of the ashes of the failure to qualify for 2018, getting him to the 2022 World Cup and getting out of the group phase there. But if there's not progress, I think American fans are saying, hey, like, we're the United States of America. U.S. Soccer ought to have some money. Why don't they go after a big name? Why are we limiting ourselves to Americans or to somebody of Gregg Berhalter's status? This generation of players can certainly play better, and I think it's only logical for fans to want a coach to bring that out of them.
Sebastian Salazar, host of much of ESPN soccer coverage with ESPN FC, the Football America's podcast and digital show, with us here on the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, reacting to the breaking news that Gregg Berhalter is out, and now per multiple reports, as the U.S. men's national team soccer coach. So, Sebi, like, obviously the dream would be go get Jurgen Klopp. That is a dream. And who knows, maybe there's a chance with the World Cup being here, like, what a cherry on top that would be of his career if he's able to get the U.S. to a semi or a final somehow in a couple of years. I don't know how realistic he sees that or how much money it would cost to get him to try. But more realistically, like what's next for U.S. soccer here, characteristics-wise, and who are some of the names that perhaps really hit those notes that U.S. soccer needs to hit with their next hire?
Well, so I would just address Klopp first, because I think in a lot of ways Klopp is kind of like a placeholder, right? He is the number one most available, hottest manager in the world right now, but he could easily be a Pep Guardiola or a Cholo Simeone or any of the best managers in the world. And I think we need to put the onus on U.S. soccer to say nothing is beyond reality. U.S. Soccer is an organization that's very capable of raising the funds to pay someone $15-20 million a year if they want. And that's probably the going rate for somebody of that ilk. Can they specifically convince Jurgen Klopp? That's another proposition, although it's worth noting Klopp did on July 4th go on his Instagram and wish the entire United States a happy July 4th.
Sure did.
That was after the U.S. had crashed out. That was after Gregg Berhalter was, in trouble, and it was after Klopp had been linked to the job. So he would have known all that when he sent that Instagram. It felt a little bit like a flirty move. But I just think, we shouldn't let U.S. soccer off the hook in terms of ambition. And then I think if you look at kind of the history of the position, it's been mostly American. And that's really the discussion kind of moving forward here is ahead of this 2026 World Cup. Is it time to do something like what U.S. soccer did in 2011 when they went out and got Jurgen Klinsmann, a big name with a big international soccer pedigree, or somebody kind of from outside the system to try and get this team to where they need to be. But I think that's really kind of where we're at when we start to think about potential replacements is we need to move past what the past has been, which is looking around Major League Soccer, who's the best American coach, who can we hire for a couple $1 million. I think it's time now to open the purse strings up a little bit and say, hey, we're U.S. soccer. We got a World Cup coming up. We're going to make a lot of money off of it if we're smart, if we're doing our job right. And we need to invest in this men's national team because, Craig, what cannot happen is a repeat of what just happened. If you have a home World Cup and you go out in a group phase, it's just a huge disaster and a major, major missed opportunity for everybody in the sport to grow the sport and because of that benefit from it. So the U.S. Soccer Federation absolutely has to get the 2026 World Cup right.
So let me follow up directly on that. Then I have one more question I want to ask you. Sebastian Salazar with us here on the Hoffman Show from ESPN FC. Like I tried to describe in my immediate reaction to this news 45 minutes ago here on the show, why 2026 was so important in my words. How would you, if in like 90 seconds, minute here, like how would you describe why, beyond the obvious that like it's at home and it would suck to lose at home, from the growth of the game, from status, from whatever it is from your vantage point as someone who lives and breathes this sport every day, why is 2026 so important and thus the level of urgency so much higher to do this now?
Well, yeah, I mean, I can give you a very personal example. I grew up in the D.C. area, and I was a fan of all sports probably from the ages of, 4 or 5 until 9 or 10. I loved baseball, basketball, hockey, American football. I played soccer, but I played the other sports as well. The 94 World Cup happened coincidentally in the same year where baseball had its strike. And those two things coming together took me from a kind of an all sports fan to a soccer obsessed fan. And really, I mean, literally, Craig, why I do what I do today is because of the experiences of the 1994 World Cup. My mom's from Mexico. My dad got us tickets. We literally followed the Mexican team around for almost all their games, 3 of their 4 games. It was a life-changing experience. And I think there's the opportunity there to take kind of the general young soccer fan and turn them into a soccer fan and therefore kind of customer for life. But that doesn't happen if you go out in the group phase. If you make it out of the group, if you have a quintessential moment, a knockout round, maybe a knockout round victory, maybe a knockout round victory over a Brazil or a big team in world football, now you're really kind of transcending the glass ceiling that has capped soccer in this country. And for soccer to hit the mainstream, pretty rare, man. You don't call me a lot. It happens only in big tournaments. And the World Cup for the men's national team at home, like literally, it ain't coming around for another 50 years. So there's a lot at stake in terms of the future of the sport in this country.
Sebi, I can call you more often if you want me to. We're friends. Like
It's all good.
Okay.
I'm not asking for more work.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. We don't even pay you for this. Like, you just do this because you're a very, very nice man, and we appreciate it. So let me ask you one final question here that I was asked on Twitter that I'm curious your answer to, which is essentially, do you trust the people in charge to get this hire right, considering they rehired Berhalter after he was out of contract following the 22 World Cup, went through the whole hullabaloo of 6 months and a search and the whole deal, and they relanded on Gregg Berhalter? That is the only hire that Matt Crocker and his group have made. So do we trust them to get it right a second time?
Yeah, it's tough, right? And you're not wrong when what you say about Matt Crocker. I think he came into a situation where the easy move may have been to keep Berhalter in a lot of ways. Maybe he was limited by the potential pool in that moment. Remember, it was shortly after the World Cup, so teams are still in season. I think in a lot of ways, the continuation of that marriage was a continuation of a marriage of convenience. Here's what I'll say about Crocker. We can undoubtedly look back on the Berhalter hire as a failure. However, if you look at what he did with the women's national team, he got rid of the manager after a failed World Cup, and he brought in literally the best candidate in the world in Emma Hayes, and he broke the market to do so. So on that hire alone, I'm willing to give Matt Crocker kind of a second chance, because I have to say I was really impressed by that bit of work. The men's game and the women's game are totally different. The budgets are going to be totally different. But I think you give him one more shot here. And unfortunately, it's the biggest shot that there is. And he just made a big mistake on the men's side. But I think this job is attractive enough. He should have a big enough budget that he should be able to get some very interesting candidates to at least sit down and listen to the pitch. And if the pitch is good enough, I think having this generation of players at a home World Cup could be a nice gig for some relatively big name managers in world football.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Sebi, what are you guys working on at ESPN that if people want more on this, they can go check out?
So of course, we'll be live tonight on Football Americas right after the second of the two semifinals in Copa America between Uruguay and Colombia. That should be a great game tonight. We'll be talking about that. A brief look ahead to the final. And, of course, the main portion of our coverage will be dedicated to this breaking news on Gregg Berhalter. I'll be up there with a couple former U.S. internationals, Ale Moreno, as well as former Venezuelan international. So we'll have the international perspective. But it should be a real good show. We've been beating this drum for a while, and I think you're going to see some good television tonight. So join us over on ESPN Plus.
Yeah, no, that'll be great. Very much looking forward to it. And also, Sebi's got a new show coming at the end of the month with DMV. Speaking of DMV soccer legends, Ali Krieger on the women's game as well, ahead of the Olympics and into the back half of the NWSL season. So awesome stuff coming from Sebi tonight and down the pike. Sebi, muchas gracias, amigo. Really, really appreciate your time. Thanks, dude.
Great to be with you, Greg.
Hey, this is DA, and you're listening to The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.